Hello and welcome to this presentation on the Nanking Massacre by Samuel DeVore, Annabelle Adams, and Tai Cheng, narrated by me, Samuel DeVore. Before discussing why the Nanking Massacre occurred, we should focus on what it was in the first place. The Rape of Nanking, or Nanking Massacre, occurred during 1937 in the midst of the Second Sino-Japanese War. China had moved its capital to Nanking in 1928, and the population had steadily grown to over 1 million during the mid-1930s, due to refugees trying to escape the first invasions of the Japanese. One of the main tragedies during the Nanking Massacre was the tragedy at the Yangtze River. Japanese soldiers fired at refugees trying to escape the Japanese and caused, by some accounts, around 50,000 deaths. After this event, the Chinese government changed their capital and moved it upriver to Hankow. Many non-Japanese and non-Chinese people were involved in the massacre in Nanking. A branch of the YMCA in Nanking would protest the Japanese embassy daily, and they also sent many letters to the Japanese embassy itself as well as others they knew, trying to spread the word about the atrocities that were occurring in the city at the time. A safety zone was established by foreigners to protect the civilians from the invading Japanese. An agreement was reached between the Japanese and the foreigners to allow this safety zone as protection for all civilians, but in return, the safety zone would not allow any combatants into it. An American missionary named Wilhelmina Vottrin helped protect thousands of women from being raped and also helped oversee the safety zone. There were countless atrocities that were committed during the massacre at Nanking. An estimated 20,000 women were raped by invading Japanese soldiers. Japanese soldiers committed vandalism and arson and burned down the city, and they also would kill anyone who tried to stop the fires they had set. There were mass executions of civilians, atrocities committed in the safety zone that was set up, with Japanese soldiers going in and arresting men indiscriminately, as well as kidnapping women out of the safety zone. Atrocities just scattered around the city. Many accounts of torture, brutalization, beatings, new and terrible ways of executing civilians. And there was also a large amount of looting of any valuables that the Japanese could get their hands on. There is no one reason why all the atrocities that occurred during the massacre at Nanking happened. Some believe that the rape of Nanking occurred to destroy any feelings of resistance and absolutely demoralize the Chinese and try and win the war just through sheer atrocity and breaking the Chinese will to fight. Chinese soldiers, after they had been beaten, when they would try to retreat, would disguise themselves as civilians to escape the Japanese, as well as attempting to go into the safety zone as civilians to protect themselves. Japanese soldiers were generally angry at the Chinese specifically and would take out their frustrations on the only thing they could at the time, which was the civilians in Nanking. The Japanese army wanted to absolutely demoralize the Chinese and break their spirit to fight in order to win this Sino-Japanese war. General Matsui Wane wished to break the Chinese will to fight, and Major General Sasuke Tuichi would order his men to take no prisoners unless ordered to. The Japanese command also wanted to destroy the basis of the Chinese government within Nanking because it was the capital of China at the time. They believed that by burning down the city, they would be able to The Japanese soldiers were angry at the Chinese for daring to fight back. At this point in the war, the Japanese army had already been fighting for longer than it wanted to be, and some Japanese soldiers had seen their friends die in the fighting. They believed that what they committed in Nanking was simply just payback for what the Chinese army had done to them. Sergeant Masuda Rokusuke wrote in his journal that some of the soldiers shouted, "You made us sacrifice our buddies, or you made us suffer," at the captive Chinese soldiers and Chinese civilians they had under their mercy as they beat them. There was a lot of confusion on what Chinese men were civilians and which were enemy combatants to the Japanese. Many Chinese soldiers that would attempt to shed their uniform and blend with the civilians in order to escape becoming a prisoner and being executed by the invading Japanese army. The Japanese were also very concerned that Chinese combatants were being sheltered in the safety zone that they had agreed to only have civilians in it. Chinese soldiers did don civilian clothes in order to take shelter in the safety zone to avoid the Japanese army. This was often used as an excuse for Japanese soldiers to enter the safety zone and not only round up whatever men they thought might be a Chinese soldier, but they would also kidnap women too. At the end of the Nanking Massacre, Japanese soldiers had declared that they had restored order to Nanking and disbanded the safety zones that were established. The commanders of the Japanese army that presided over the massacre in Nanking were recalled, and General Iwan Matsui was later found guilty of war crimes and executed for his part in the massacre at Nanking. Some Japanese deny the event ever happened, even to this day. They claim that the event is just Chinese propaganda from the war and that it's just not something that happened. The massacre remains a major obstacle between relations of Japan and China, both due to the horrific nature of what occurred there, as well as the many Japanese that simply deny it ever happened as well. And the teachings in some Japanese schools would barely mention the massacre or gloss over it. Thank you for watching this presentation on the massacre in Nanking. These are the sources we used in the making of this presentation.